I was watching the map going there, but I'm not listening to it. I had my headphones on.
Been a while since I've done this.
That's actually good.
So we're live on YouTube now.
I hope so.
Oh, very good. Very good.
No. 1 mile is halfway between the 2 miles. 1.5 miles is to the second tree line.
Okay. Hmm. Wow. You know, one of the reasons why I think um, Jesus wants this particular material out there is because, you know, when the original Course in Miracles came out, Ken Wapnick edited it from what Bill Thedford edited it from. So in the notes, Bill is the one who's meant to do the editing. And what Jesus actually said wasn't edited. He said Bill is responsible for what stays in and what comes out. And he was given a clear reason why. Because Jesus didn't want stuff kept in that he thought would increase people's fear of the material. So Bill had to read through it and see what would not increase fear, but allowed people's fear to be understood. Not to not be fearful, but to allow, and he used the term soul over 200 times. When it originally came out from the foundation, it had been re-edited by Ken Wapnick and Helen. And there's a lot of new information about how Ken said, "Oh, Helen would never do anything that Jesus wouldn't allow her to do." But that's not true. When Ken first started to come to our house, which was early on, before he even had his center, he talked a lot about the editing with Helen, and he never once mentioned that. What he actually mentioned was he would go to Helen's house, and Helen would fall asleep on the couch while he was doing the editing. So he was the one who got the editing done. Well, he took the term soul out entirely, and he only used it when it was directly involved with biblical references. He took the term soul out entirely, and he replaced it with the term spirit. And when asked, he said spirit and soul have roughly the same meaning. But when you look at, when Jesus clarifies the terms or tells you how he uses them, they don't have the same meaning. So when the court case was over, and the copyright was freed, Jesus said to me, publish Bill Thedford's edition and put the term soul back in. Because people have this idea, and what Jesus is saying throughout the thing is, listen, you're whole and perfect as God created you, and that doesn't change. Now, what he's also saying is God has but one son, but that one son is all the soul soul wise infinite. There's an infinite number of souls. So he refers to each of us as a soul. We are all souls that make up God's one son. And in this, when he talks about soul, he talks about soul as the purity of God creating you,
We crown your eyes.
and it with the impossibility of there ever being anything other than God created you as. So that is who you are. Now, in this, he says, only the mind is capable of illumination. The soul is already illuminated, and the body in itself is too dense. The mind, however, can bring its own illumination to the body by recognizing that the density is the opposite of intelligence and therefore unamenable to independent learning. It is, however, easily brought into alignment with a mind which has learned to look beyond the density toward the light. So he's saying is, like, our soul is available to us. And when we get to our soul, we see ourselves as God created us. And our mind can be illuminated by that light and use that light as a way of seeing. So it's just interesting. Now, when you read after the editing took place, there's this mistaken idea based on, Christian traditions that of original sin, and everybody thinks that's upon the soul. Like our original sin affected us as soul, and so we have to purify ourselves of the original sin. And that's not what Jesus is saying at all. So a lot of this is a correction of traditional Christianity in terms of how people understand it.
Poppe.
When they eliminated the word soul, they took out, exactly what he says we are created as. Now, spirit, when he goes into the idea of what spirit is, or the Holy Spirit, he says spirit or the Holy Spirit is a communication link. Spirit is the last communication link that allows us to communicate with the mind of God or the mind of Jesus. And so the Holy Spirit is what, in a sense, we talk about a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, the Father created the Son as an extension, and we're held together in the oneness of the spirit of creation as a soul having been created. So spirit and soul don't really roughly have the same meaning in the way Jesus has used them. But there's been such a misunderstanding about that based on the editing of it that people miss the idea of them being a pure, whole, perfect soul without error. Like you were created without error, and who you are as a soul is not subject to error. Now, one of the things that, you know, and I'm always blessed by this, and it's like more and more so, I'm beginning to like really appreciate it, whereas I didn't always before. I've been blessed by communication with Jesus since before I even knew the course. And Jesus comes to me and he shows me things. So one day I was lying and he said, "Do you want to see what you look like as a soul?" And of course I said yes. And all of a sudden he just showed me this illuminated beingness. That's the best I can come up with it. This illuminated beingness. And what he was trying to show me, he was trying to show me that nothing can touch that. It's like it's covered by even the thinnest sheet of paper would not allow the soul to be touched by anything. And that's what we are. And we never change in the mind of God. And we need to come to recognize ourselves as that soul. So when you read these things, Now, a lot of this stuff was really edited out. A lot was edited out by Bill because they had a particular, he had a particular mindset as to what, but the term soul was kept in. One of the things, and Lana was the one who helped me understand this, one of the things that I realized was, so say like Ken Wapnick. So Ken Wapnick was an out of work, recently credentialed psychologist, and he went to Helen and Bill to look for a job. Now, Helen and Ken were like mother and son, and Bill sort of bowed out of the picture. But what they did do was they gave Ken Bill's edit of the course for him to read. And he read it, and he, from reading it, he had a particular understanding that wasn't necessarily what Jesus was talking about, but what helped him. So he went back to Helen, and he told Helen he thought it needed more editing. Now, Ken had an idea of what he wanted the course to say because he thought that's what it was saying. So he edited it from the perspective of making it say what he thought it was meant to say as he heard it. And what I've noticed is every single person who has put out an edition of this, even Robert Perry, when I started to read it, and Robert Perry claims that he used the text for the text of A Course in Miracles, but even Robert Perry edited it. So sometimes he used the word soul, sometimes he used the word spirit. So while he says he used the original text, even he edited the text. And what I've noticed in looking at the different editions was something that Lana helped me to see, was that everybody who read it had an experience of some kind and a meaning for them personally. So they went back and re-edited it in order to make what they were thinking true, rather than just do it the way Jesus, Helen, and Bill were told to do it. So it's just been recently that Jesus asked me to put out Helen's notes as a book, and he said use the first 8 or 9 chapters. And the reason for that is, in the original 8 or 9 chapters, Helen is sort of going through her own questions and Bill their own questions based on their resistance to the material, which eventually, after chapter 9, dies out. Like there's very little of that. Like all their questions were sort of basically answered by chapter 8 or 9. And she just took down the notes the way he gave it to her. And very little editing was needed by Bill after that because there was none of the personal dialogue in it. And a lot of the personal dialogue in the beginning was based on use of sex and sexual material. And there was a reason for that, because they were in Helen like Bill and didn't like her husband, and Bill was gay and had particular understandings about it. And a lot of the material deals directly with their understanding and also gives psychological techniques in order to help them with their clients. But Helen, one of the things Helen said was she didn't want sex in her book. So it was all of that stuff was edited out. The foundation has used the claim that the material was too personal, so therefore that's why it was cut out. And it wasn't that it told a lot of secrets, it's that it was personal to them within the nature of the conversation Jesus was having. And now that they're all gone, now that, Helen's gone and Bill is gone, and the funny part about it is I've had communication with Helen. There's no reason for these things to not come out because they're very helpful. So it's really, the material is pretty challenging in terms of some of the stuff it's saying. If you're used to the course the way it's been edited by, say, the foundation or other people, but it's much more informational and personal, and conversational. And the use of the terms as he uses them clears a lot of stuff up that sort of was, not quite understood clearly, because of the nature of the switching of the terms. And soul was a very big one, because like I said, it was used over 200 times, and in the first edition that came out, it was maybe in there 5 times, and it was only in direct biblical quotes. So it's interesting, having seen my soul and, understanding what Jesus is trying to say based on the nature of us being created by God as whole and perfect. Now, what he's saying is, as a soul, you were created whole and perfect. And the sum total of all the souls created, in number infinite, in nature eternal, that makes up God's one Son, or the Christ. So it leaves room for our individuality in that sense. And it doesn't say there's only one of us. It never says in the Course there's only one of us. It says God has but one Son, and that one Son is you. But what's left out in most of the editions is the idea that God has one Son, and that one Son is you, and his one Son is the sum total of all souls created by the Father as his extension, which allows us, in a sense, the ability to be individual, as well as the ability to have the sameness of the perfection as God created us, whole and perfect, without that ever being touched by anything we think, do, or say, or anything within the illusion at all. And now I'm just saying this as an aside, because when I read these notes, like, I'm blown away, and I've read them before, but when I read them and I see what he's actually saying, it's so refreshing and so personal, and it's so revealing as to what he's shown me about myself and about all of our brothers. And without the understanding of his terms, and the fact that he even used the terms for a reason, it's almost impossible to discuss this stuff, because people go back to other people's opinions rather than Jesus' words himself. And, the importance for me is what Jesus is saying is, hey, listen, these are my words. If you want to know what they mean, ask me. Because he's trying to open up communication between us and, through the Holy Spirit, to show us that there really is no such thing as death. So if he can communicate with us, or, like Vicky's friend Claire, or Paulie, if people who seem to have passed away in the world can communicate with us, then there really is no death. There's some sort of transit. Death is a transition into another form of life, another form of living. It's not a death and then you go to heaven. It's not like that. It's just releasing yourself from an effect that's self-made and self-imposed, because you're ready to go beyond the need for the self-imposition and the limitation. So, and using these notes gives me the ability to talk about things like this, whereas using the Course completely ignores these words because they're not in it. And if I started to talk to people about Jesus' use of the term soul based on the foundation issue, they just negate what they're saying because they've been told soul is roughly the same as.
Living here for a couple of weeks.
So it
Oh yeah.
just blows me away. And what happens
And
is I get so grateful for like my own communication and for the ability to even have these words. And the only reason why I do is because of the lawsuit. And in the lawsuit, in the discovery, they had to give me all the material. And what I immediately did was read the material, and then we were told to put out the sparkly, and I started to send the material to everybody I knew at the time who could benefit from it. And Robert Perry happened to be one of them. So I got a big box of this material, every edition from Helen's notes. We even had the steno notes, her shorthand, which is virtually unreadable. So I sent those around to a lot of different people, and somebody actually took 10 years and went through her steno notes and translated them and made an edition out of that. And I'm just so grateful for that, for what has gone on and the ability to have these words directly from Jesus that I don't know what to say. And all of this stuff verifies the experiences that I have had with him just from saying yes. And part of the reason why he wanted this to come out at all was because he's encouraging people to communicate with him in the self-same personal nature that Helen and Bill did. It's not that you have to be pure already to hear his voice. You wouldn't need to be pure. You wouldn't need to hear his voice if you knew who you were. But you can have all the misunderstandings you have, all the sort of like ill feelings or sinfulness you think you have, and all he's asking us to do is turn to him so that we can communicate with him, because he will give us a direct communication, and that shows us, number one, he didn't die, he's still alive here with us, and number two, you're getting a direct transmission of the truth as an experience, as well as getting a personal understanding of what you need to know based on what we need to learn individually. And I just think it's spectacular. I never know what to say about it. And when I read some of these stuff, it's like it just completely, I don't know. I just get so grateful. And I've probably said this 100,000 times, but I just get so grateful. And I really don't know what to say or do, because this says it all as far as it needs no explanation when you read it from that personal standpoint as directly to you without the translation or interruption of other people's viewpoints upon his words. That's the best I can say. And I
Okay,
know,
that's wonderful. Thank you.
I know we almost up with our time. So what I'll do is I'm just going to read until the end of the next page, and then we'll be done for the day. The density is the opposite of intelligence and therefore unamenable to independent learning. It is, however, easily brought into alignment with a mind which has learned to look beyond density toward the light, and that's what we are as souls. Corrective learning always begins with awakening the spiritual eye and turning away from the belief in physical sight. The reason this entails fear is because man is afraid of what his spiritual eye will see, which is why he closed it in the first place. We said before that the spiritual eye cannot see error and is capable only of looking beyond it to the defense of atonement. There is no doubt that the spiritual eye does produce extreme discomfort by what it sees. The thing that man forgets is that the discomfort is not the final outcome of its perception. When the spiritual eye is permitted to look upon the defilement of the altar, it also looks immediately toward atonement. Nothing which the spiritual eye perceives can induce fear. Everything that results from accurate spiritual awareness merely is channelized toward correction. Discomfort is aroused only to bring the need to correct forcibly into awareness. And that's a big statement. What he's saying is the need to experience discomfort is primary to healing. Because unless you feel the discomfort, there's nothing to hear. So trying to stay safe and in silence or alone really doesn't allow you the discomfort you need to heal your mind and therefore understand what you are as a soul. But it certainly allows you to not experience discomfort and think that you're only experiencing love, which is not his technique at all. When what the physical eye sees is not corrective, nor can it be corrected by any device which can be physically seen. As long as a man believes in what his physical sight tells him, all his corrective behavior will be misdirected. The reason why the real vision is obscured is because man cannot endure to see his own defiled altar. But since the altar has been defiled, the fact becomes doubly dangerous unless it's perceived. This perception is totally non-threatening because of the atonement. The fear of healing arises, in the end, from an unwillingness to accept the unequivocal fact that healing is necessary. Now, you can't get a much more simpler statement than that. I mean, it's so direct and so profound in its directness that you don't even know what to do with it. I mean, he's saying, listen, the reason why you need to be healed is because you're unhealed, and you're not going to recognize. You're going to deny your unhealedness, which is why you need to experience discomfort. And discomfort is involved in relationship. You're never going to allow yourself to experience that alone because you're in denial of the fact that you're uncomfortable, and you get the result of your thinking. So your thinking is channelized toward that denial and making that denial true. Healing was an ability which was lent to man after the separation, before which it was completely unnecessary. Like all aspects of the space-time belief, healing ability is temporary. However, as long as time persists, healing remains among the stronger human protections. This is because healing always rests on charity, and charity is a way of perceiving the true perfection of another, even if he cannot perceive it himself. Most of the loftier concepts of which man is capable is now time dependent. Now, what he's also saying is the only reason we need space time is for the healing of our mind. And when the healing of our mind occurs, we no longer need space and time. So space and time is not causative, and it has a limit, and the limit is based on our need for it and our lack of accepted correction. So it does come to an end, and we bring about that end by the healing of our own minds. So he says the only thing at our disposal is the miracle, because the miracle shortens the need for time by allowing us to learn in a more rapid method what we wouldn't have learned before. And his example of that is Helen with the coat. Like, he tells Helen to go to a particular store to get the coat she wanted, and said you would have got the same coat in the end. You just would have went to 16 different stores. I'm telling you exactly where it is so we can save time. And you don't have to waste your time. but you're going to get the result of your own thinking. And the result of your thinking was that coat. So, in that little segment, he's trying to show her how we can save time in the entirety of space and time and bring time to an end because we no longer need it. So, in the end, when we're healed totally and with all of our brothers, time is no longer necessary. And what we're finding is when we have communication with brothers who are beyond our space and time, who we are doesn't change. Our minds and our heart and our soul are still existent in that sense. And it's not that we were, so in other words, we weren't born, we didn't come about in being born. We came about in creation, and we don't end in death because life is eternal. And in these segments of learning, we get these little hints, and the hints turn into experiences. And the more we have these experiences, the more beneficial it is to our learning. And because of the nature of this stupendous nature of these occurrences, they become more real to us than the illusions that we held about ourselves before, which is what he's saying. You have to question your own thoughts. You have to question your own beliefs about stuff. You have to decide that maybe you don't know, that maybe what you think isn't exactly the case. Charity is really a weaker reflection of a much more powerful love encompassment, which is far beyond any form of charity that man can conceive of as yet. Charity is essential to right mindedness in the limited sense to which right mindedness can now be attained. Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishment in time. Since his own thinking is faulty, he cannot see the atonement himself, or he would have no need for charity at all. You can't get more reasonable than that. The charity which is accorded him is both an acknowledgement that he is weak and a recognition that he could be stronger. The way in which both of these beliefs are stated clearly implies their dependence on time, making it quite apparent that charity lies within the framework of human limitations, though toward the higher levels. Before, twice in fact, that only revelation transcends time. The miracle is an expression of true human charity, can only shorten it at best. It must be understood, however, that whenever a man offers a miracle to another, he is shortening the suffering of both. This introduces a correction into the record, which corrects retroactively as well as progressively. I think that's a good place to leave it for today. So I don't know if anybody has anything they want to say, but please feel free to.
Well, Teddy, I can just say when I first began studying the course and I became aware of Ken Wapnick and his teachings, I had the feeling that I had to have my own experience with the course first before listening to anybody else's interpretations or teachings, no matter what it was. And then there would be a more solid connection with the source of the teaching as further guidance. So
Absolutely, that's absolutely true, and that's what it's for.
mhm,
He's really using Helen and Bill as an example of the ability for anybody to communicate with them,
yes,
even if they don't believe him or don't accept that it's him as far. Finally, they both do, and finally, whether they believed it or not, or it was irrelevant. They did what they were asked to do, and it allowed them to have a perspective from which to question their own thinking and their own beliefs.
but it's also goes in a way It's beliefs, yes, but it goes into bringing up the fear,
Yes.
which is where the resistance comes in working directly with inner voice. And
Yes.
inner voice is always so accepting. In fact, it can only work with us if we're open and honest about what's in our minds at that moment and
Right.
about the fear.
Well, that's one of the things that I find with this material. I mean, Jesus tells them some of the stuff they do is stupid, but he's not judgmental of them as far as being whole and perfect. He's not saying that changes your wholeness and perfection. He's saying it only hinders you in your learning. And there's ways that you don't have to do that to yourself.
Mhm.
So it's very sort of not judgmental. At the same time, it's incredibly confronting too.
Mhm. And that's what we need. That's what I need.
Absolutely. And discussion of the course is good. Listen to other people's opinions is good. But the application and the use and application of it is what it's all about. Otherwise, it's just another sort of philosophy. It's a philosophical endeavor that could be true or not true. And until you utilize it in the application, you don't know.
Well, thank you, Teddy. I appreciate your sharing your insights so much.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Teddy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.